When I lived with the Italian-American side of my family, I don't know if you know this, but I'm part Italian. Just in case you didn't figure that out from my name. I really feel like my parents wanted a billboard that just like screamed it. His name's Giuseppe, he's really Italian. My dad went by Joey, but I wasn't allowed to go by Joey. And I'm glad for that because I'm not a Joey, I'm a Giuseppe. But when I lived with the Italian-American side of my family, we were really proud of Christopher Columbus. Now, this was during the 80s and early 90s. And there's a reason that Italian-Americans felt fiercely proud of Christopher Columbus. It's because we felt like this familial connection to him. We saw a story of exploration and immigration, and we thought, wow, he was brave, just like Grandpa was brave. He did something really hard. He went to this place, and he made it possible for us to be here. We wouldn't be here without him. The stories we tell about our founders say a lot about how we see ourselves. 100 years ago or so, there was a push made in our country to really promote Christopher Columbus. Does anybody know why? It's because Italian Americans were kind of a new thing for this country, and our country wasn't doing really good with the new folks in town. They're like, look at those lousy, I'm just gonna say Italians because they had much worse names. They're good for nothing, they're takers, they're not makers, they're gonna take my job, blah blah blah, right? And so, other folks in our country started making a push to talk about Christopher Columbus. Well, don't you see a connection between Columbus being here and you being here? He's not just connected to the Italian Americans, he's connected to anybody of European descent who's here. And so, he was promoted, statues were put up, he had an inflated role in our history books that didn't exist as strongly before. Now, it had a really positive intent. Boy, wouldn't it be really great if our Italian Americans could actually see themselves in the story of our own country? And wouldn't it be really great if other people could also see them in the story of our own country instead of trying to cut them off and say, no, you're not a part of this nation? But it also had a negative side to it. A lot of virtues were projected onto Christopher Columbus that we wanted to see in ourselves. He was brave. He was a good and godly man. He did what was right. He was actually really forward-thinking, right? He took a stand when other people thought it was foolishness. But it also left off a lot of things. Maybe one or two you could think of, I don't know. It left off the plundering, the looting of the people he encountered who treated him with hospitality initially. It left out the murdering. It left out a great many other atrocities that I'm not going to name. I guess we might have little ears amongst us. And it's unfortunate because both parts of those story are true for him. Maybe not the godly part of it, but he thought he was being godly because he had the backing of the church even. Sometimes the backing of your church doesn't mean that you're doing the right thing. I'm just going to point that out. As I said, the stories we tell about our beginnings are not as much historical accounts of those who came before us as much as they are stories about how we see ourselves today, or how we want to see ourselves. And this story of Christopher Columbus makes me think of another story of exploration and travel and adventure. Have you ever heard of the Greek myth Jason and the Argonauts? Raise your hand. Yeah. Don't worry, it won't be a quiz. I'm not going to, the Argonautica was one of the most popular works of Greek storytelling in the ancient world, during the BC era. It was right up there with Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, but Homer didn't write it. And it was a story about a great many things, including beginnings. For those of you who are interested in how the story of Abraham riffs on other ancient stories, you can check that out. I know some of you are big nerds like me, and you may be. But there's one important aspect that was read earlier. You see, his crew, Jason's crew, the Argonauts, on their return trip home, they got stuck when a wind blew them into the shallow waters of Libya. And wouldn't you know it, it was the great son of Poseidon, Triton himself. Triton, who you may know from The Little Mermaid in the 90s. You remember that, King Triton? That guy shows up and he says, hey, I really like this tripod you have. Can I have it? If I have it, I'll help you guys out. And they're like, sure, we don't want to be stuck here. So they give it to him, and as a reward, he tells them, he saves them, and he also says, if that tripod's ever removed, you guys can claim this land. You could just go ahead and take Northern Africa for yourself, giving the justification for generations of Greeks to be able to say, oh, that land is ours. We got divine permission to come and take it, even though it belongs to other people. And this also connects to the story of the most famous Argonauts. I don't know if you've heard of him. There's also a Disney movie about him. Hercules. There are dozens of cities around Europe that have Hercules' name in them. And folks would trace the beginning, the founding of their city, back to Hercules, or at least they would claim that, right? And there are two people groups who are most notable, or at least in our minds, the most prominent ones that we could say trace their lineage back to Hercules. That would be the Spartans and the Romans later. They would say, we are children of Hercules or Heracles. And they would seek to exemplify what Hercules represented to them: strength, craftiness, bravery. The Spartans and the Romans lifted these things up as the greatest that men could be in their world. To be like Hercules, right? So how did the people of the Hebrew Bible see themselves? Well, as you're used to me saying, there's a great many perspectives. But one perspective is that they saw themselves as children of Abraham, as the story is told in Genesis 12 through, I think like 18 or 19 or so. It's a good amount of chapters for this book. And here's what they saw. They saw that they were not like children of Hercules. They saw that they were not necessarily like the Argonauts or their descendants. No, they exemplified the traits of their founding father. But wouldn't you know it, he's a problematic patriarch. When God seeks out Abraham, he and his family recently migrated out of Ur of Chaldea, which means that he is connected to the land that the Babylonians will eventually come out of. God calls him, seeks him out. We don't know why. Our writer never tells us. In fact, our writer is much more concerned with us knowing the flaws of Abraham than he is concerned with us knowing what makes him extraordinary. God tells him, hey, if you go to this place that I'm preparing for you, you're going to have a land of your own, and you're going to have you're going to have all of these kids. You're going to have a nation worth of kids, and you're going to bless the whole world through those kids. Abraham thinks this is a pretty sweet deal. So he packs up I was going to say his family, but it's really him and Sarah, and their crew. As you may have heard, he has slaves. Let's consider this the first aspect of problematicness. Let's not gloss that over too quickly. I know we can say, yeah, but it's not like American chattel slavery. Sure, but he still owns people, and that's a problem, right? Can we say that's a problem? Okay, it's a problem. And they go off for parts unknown. So far, this seems pretty brave, right? Well, as they're traveling, eventually they end up in the land of Egypt. And even though Abraham is 75 and his wife, Sarah, is 65, he is very concerned that someone is going to kill him for the sake of taking his wife. She is gorgeous. Maybe that's like one of her superpowers. She's got a really great skin regimen. So like 65, you just have to worry about being killed so that somebody else can be with her. I don't know. I don't know what she's doing. So he says to his crew, I want you guys to tell anybody who meets us that we're just brother and sister, okay? Now don't worry, folks. This is a lie. But it's only a half-truth, because he's her half-brother. Maybe we'll consider that as moderns, like number 2 of like problematic features in the story, right? Not great, not great. But he is telling them, I want you to tell this half-truth, this lie. Just let out the part that, we're married. So Pharaoh sees Sarah. He sees her and he wants her and he calls her into his court, and he doesn't mind her brother Abraham so much. In fact, he treats him pretty nicely. But before they can do anything, God hits them with a plague. Now Pharaoh figures out that he has been lied to. There is a scandal happening, and they've been fit with divine punishments of some kinds. So he kicks Abraham and Sarah out. He says, how could you guys have done this? Like, well, I was worried you were going to kill me. Oh, great. Yeah, that's a good reason for me and my people to be suffering with this plague. Could have just told us the truth. And this story repeats itself later in another country. So this is something that happens twice. So Abraham trusts God, but not always. Abraham lays claim to the promise of God, and yet still is scared for his own skin. This is a great juxtaposition to Hercules, right? Known for his bravery. And instead of being honest, he's a liar. But, he's only lying because he's scared. Both times that this happens, the kings are trying to be on the good side of God, who sent them, punishment. So Abraham leaves even wealthier than when he entered, which is interesting. And he continues on, and eventually he gets really discouraged. He's worried that God's not going to make good on this promise, that he's not going to have kids. I mean, I don't know why he would worry about that. He's only 75. He's got his whole life ahead of him. And God gives him the vision that was read earlier. God appears to him. And God says, I want you to look up at these stars. Do you see all the stars? Can you count all those stars? That's how many descendants you're going to have. Okay? I don't want you to worry about this. I'm going to take care of this. And when he wakes, the thing our text doesn't tell us, because this happens just a few verses later, Abraham sets up a really lovely covenant space. Doesn't that sound nice, a covenant space? We use the term covenant in our faith tradition quite a bit. It's a relational promise, right? It's a promise baked into relationship. You know, I'm going to honor my parts of it, you're going to honor your parts of it, and together we've got this partnership. That's how we talk about call agreements between pastors and churches, right? It's covenants. That's how we talk about our relationship with our broader denomination. It's a partnership. All right, so prepare yourselves for this beautiful scene of establishing covenant space. Abraham has his folks bring him slaughtered animals. And he cuts the big livestock in half, and he puts a bunch of them over here. And he puts the other halves of these cows and other creatures, lambs and whatnot, over here. And he takes the birds, but don't worry about that. They're too small for him to cut in half and put on either side of himself. He just takes their dead carcasses and puts them on either side. Just like one does when you're like establishing a covenant with a new pastor or like in a wedding ceremony, right? And in this gruesome, bloody scene, wouldn't you know it, the vultures are pretty excited. They want to come down and just pig out. And who can blame them? There's like all of these dead creatures on either side. It looks like an awful car wreck, I'm sure. I'm not going to get any further into that. I'm realizing I'm entering disdainful territory, so I apologize. I don't want to set too bloody of a picture here. But it's gross. And he spends all day chasing the vultures away, and then the poor old guy gets tuckered out. He falls asleep off to the side. And then God appears. And God appears in the form of smoke, like a smoking pot, and fire, and goes between the animal pieces. You see, in the ancient world, in this region anyway, this is how leaders established political alliances with each other. As gruesome a scene as it is, it sets forth this point. If I betray this promise that I'm making with you to be in this alliance, may I be treated like these animals. Now, to me, this seems like something you would see in a mob movie more than what I expect to see in the Bible. But, you know, maybe the ancient world is a lot more like mob movies than we like to admit, right? So God goes between these two piles, and Abraham does not. So there's a couple of points being made here. First, God cannot be killed. And just as God cannot be killed, God is exemplifying, I'm not going to fail this promise I'm making to you, Abraham. I am indeed going to bless the world through you. And Abraham cannot pass through this. He's asleep. And so here's the other point. Abraham, I am not going to kill you if you fail to uphold this promise. I am going to remain faithful to you even when you're faithless. I am going to remain trustworthy to you even when you are untrustworthy. Even when you let me down, Abraham, I'm not going to let you down. I am not going to cease my promises because of your mistakes. I don't know about you, but this is something I still need to hear today. I make mistakes. I know I might be the odd one out in this room. I've let myself down plenty of times. I failed to live out this mission of love that we are commanded and encouraged to live into. And although this brings such great joy in life to me, I still stumble and fall and make mistakes. I can be selfish. I can be scared. And sometimes when we are scared, we feel untrustworthy. We feel like we're letting down not just ourselves and other people, but we may feel like we're letting God down. But this partnership, this relationship we have with God is bigger than that. Just like we remind ourselves each and every week, God is as close to us as our own breath. And that doesn't change based on our performance. But I do hope that it encourages us to keep trying. Now, that is another consistent thing that we see in the story of these problematic patriarchs. Although they keep making mistakes, and some of them are pretty big mistakes, we also see that they try again. They keep trying. And I hope that encourages us to keep trying. I also hope that when we look at this story of Abraham, I hope it can encourage us to look at the story of our own ancestors more honestly. I mean, this story invites us to be critical of a spiritual founder. So surely we ought to be able to be critical of the people who came before us. Tender, honest, grateful, I'm sure. I mean, we wouldn't be here without our predecessors. But still, not everything we've inherited is beautiful. Much of it is. And some of it is as problematic as our patriarchs. So as we go out and about this week, I hope that we can remember that God loves us, warts and all, problematic behavior and all. And God still calls us to keep going, to keep trying. May we forgive other people who let us down. May we forgive ourselves. May we be people of great trust and great love. And may the area of Park Rose be blessed in us simply doing those things.